thank you so much for coming out tonight and to Amplify and to the Texas Book Festival. I am such a big fan of Jennifer's. I'm friends with her. We've met at festivals on the Texas kind of circuit. Yeah. And so we've talked about her
and we
other
share an
books.
agent.
And we share an agent.
Which is
so we've talked about, I know her process, I know her other books and what went on, but not Down Came the Rain. So I'm excited to hear about this book. And I think what we'll do is Jennifer will read a little bit, and then I'll ask her some questions, and we'll save time for questions from you guys. And also, I wanted to read your bio. Let me see if it's right here, because you have a very impressive bio. All right, okay. Jennifer Mathieu is the author of Devoted Afterwards, The Liars of Mariposa Island, The Truth About Alice, you're the winner of the Teen Choice Debut Author Award, and Bad Girls Never Say Die. Her novel Moxie was developed into a film by Amy Poehler for Netflix. Jennifer teaches high school English in Texas, where she lives in the Houston area with her husband and son. Yeah. And yes, you're a big deal in my house. No.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mara. That's sweet of you to say.
So why don't we start? Do you want to just talk about what your book is about real quick, and then
do a little bit of a reading? A little read? Sure. So, well, first of all, thank you all for being here tonight on a Friday evening to take time out. It really means a lot. Thank you to the Texas Book Festival. Thank you to Amplify. It's just a delight to be able to come here and share this evening with you. So this is my 7th novel for young adults, which is sort of wild to me. My first novel came out almost 10 years ago, so it's kind of crazy to think about. And so Down Came the Rain is set in a post-Hurricane Harvey Houston. I'm not a native Houstonian, but I've lived there now for 20 years, so I feel like I've earned my Houston stripes, and certainly living through Harvey, I think I did. And it tells the story of 2 teenagers, Eliza and Javier, who have lived through this weather event and are coping with it in very different ways. I actually got the idea for the book in part because of my own experiences after Harvey and the experiences of my students. But there's a suburb of Houston called Kingwood, far north, and I remember in the days after Harvey, I saw in the news that one of the high schools in that area had flooded and had to share space with another high school. And of course, that was a little plot point for me. And I thought, what would that be like? And I decided to imagine a Houston where 2 different high schools have to share a space. Eliza goes to a more affluent, sort of resourced high school, the kind of high school, it's public school, but the kind of school that parents will, lie about where they live to try to get their kid in there. And she's proud to go there. She's going to be a junior. She wants to go to UT. She's a go-getter, very type A. And not only does her school flood, her home floods. And she and her parents have to move in with relatives. She has to share a room with her infant cousin who cries all the time. And she's very stressed about how she's going to make her dreams come true. But she's also very anxious about the changing world in which she lives in which we're living in. And she is a climate activist. She is deeply committed. She recycles everything. She gets after her parents for not doing so. She wishes her cousin wore cloth diapers. She is constantly thinking about ways that she can sort of change what's happening. And she feels that it's almost like something she could put on a to-do list, like an action item, and make it happen. And so she's all in for the climate. But by focusing on that, she's also sort of ignoring the feelings and the emotions and the anxiety that she has experienced and started to develop post-Harvey. So she ends up going and sharing space with Javier's school. And Javier, while his home didn't flood, he is experiencing his own grief and trauma after Harvey. He struggles when it rains. He starts to have panic attacks when he hears the rain. And he's having his own feelings about it and grappling to deal with them. He sees Eliza on the first day of school when all these kids from the affluent high school come to his more working class, sort of more rough around the edges school. And they meet, and they end up starting a climate organization together. There's a little romance too. I don't want to spoil the whole thing. But they're grappling with this in very different ways. Eliza wants to push down her feelings and just kind of make climate change an action item. And Javier starts to think, I have to start dealing with these emotions and these feelings. And so it's told in dual POV. It moves back and forth between them. It's my attempt also to explore certain issues, how race and class intersect with our changing world. Eliza considers herself to be pretty aware of her privilege, but she stumbles several times in this book because she doesn't fully grasp all the intersections of how race and class work with this issue. And Javier is learning too, and so they're learning together. So I'm going to open, I have these little inner chapters that I wrote. It's funny, in my last book, Bad Girls Never Say Die, I had these little inner chapters that I was really proud of, and my editor did not like them, and we took them out. And then I wrote this book, and she said, I think this book should have inner chapters. And I was like, what? So it was funny, but I'm glad she said so because I really enjoyed writing them. And so there's several of them in the book, and it's sort of told in third person, collective third person in the we pronoun. And in my mind, when I wrote them, it was like the city of Houston is talking to the reader. So the opening, before we even meet Eliza and Javier, we meet Houston. We thought the rain would come in through the front door, polite. Maybe it knocks first. But it didn't, no matter how much we stared it down in the black of night. No matter how much we peered through our windows, wishing we could be lulled to sleep by the beating drums of 50 million raindrops into water that's been collecting for days, instead of tortured awake night and day by the sound. To be fair, water did come in the front door for some of us, leaking under wood and fiberglass and spilling everywhere like blood and guts. But for many of us, water came up like a ghost that can haunt you through any crack or crevice, through any space it wants. Water came for us. It made us clamber up onto kitchen counters and climb up into attics and haul ourselves onto rooftops. It entered our homes and it entered our lives, and it rose indiscriminately in every neighborhood across this city. And we had to run from it, or try to. We were people on the news, worldwide coverage. We were refugees in our own neighborhoods. We were pitiable, and for good reason. It rained and it rained and it rained and it rained. For 4 days and 4 nights, it rained. We had built homes here and had done so much living. We had grown and thrived and endured and constructed a city of steel and freeways where once had stood swamps. Like all human beings through all time and space, we believed there was something untouchable about us, something powerful and resistant and strong. But water does whatever it wants. So that's the opener, and reading it just takes me back to living through Harvey, which I know you're going to
I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, so I read the snippet from Kirkus Reviews, which I love, an empathetic exploration of the complex impacts of climate change on young adults. And I have to say, this is the first book I've read that really captures that anxiety that I think after this long, hot summer, pretty much everywhere, and crazy weather events, that I think everyone is feeling this, but you were ahead of your time. I think you were ahead of your time a bit. Can you talk a little bit about what brought you to writing this book? If you were in the middle of Bad Girls Never Say Die, how long after Harvey did you know that you wanted to write this? And yeah.
So the book it's dedicated in part to the city of Houston, but also to my good friend from college, Jill Cubitt, who we've been friends since we were 18 years old. And she lives in New York City, and she is a genius. She went to Harvard for graduate school, and she started her own climate nonprofit called Dear Tomorrow that encourages people to advocate for good climate policy through the lens of thinking about this issue via the young people in their lives, whether that's their own children or just young people that they care about. And she had been after me probably since my second or third novel. She's like, you need to write a young adult novel about climate change. Like, you need to write about this. You need to write about this. And Moxie came out, and Moxie was coming out as Harvey was happening, because it was just very chaotic because it was the fall of 2017. I had flown to New York the summer before, like right a few weeks before Harvey. Of course, we didn't know what was going to happen, and I stayed with her. I was up in New York for Moxie stuff, and we were talking, and she's like, "You've got to write this book. Like, I really think it could be impactful and important." And I was like, "Yeah, And I had some grist for the mill. I'd read an article about a teacher in a rural part of, I read it in the Times, a teacher in a rural part of the United States that was trying to talk about climate with his students, and the students got angry because they said the issue doesn't exist. Like, he was a science teacher, and I thought maybe I'll tell a story about that kind of situation. Like, I don't know. And I was mulling it over, and then Harvey happened, and it just was like, okay, this is it. Like, the universe is telling me something. I had other books under contract. I was finishing Bad Girls, I was trying to time it. And I had a 7th book to write for Macmillan, and that I said, that's going to be the climate book. So that's how it happened. And Jill, in the back of the book, I'm just so grateful to her for this. She did it for free. She just said, I'll just do it. No one has to pay me. There's a resources guide in the back of the book that she wrote, it's like very expansive, and all kinds of good resources about the climate issue, including emotional issues, which is something I try to deal with in the book. So I credit my friend Jill.
I wanted to ask you about about how you arrive at your main characters, but also how much of this did you bring in from personal experience, and also what you saw in your students?
So, as I'm sure every author would say, we all find little bits of ourselves in our books and in our characters. Authors tend to do this. We try to make sense of things in fiction that, are also happening in our real lives. Although my students are always like, is this us? It's that so-and-so. I'm like, no, it is fiction. I do make the characters up, but parts of course, their experiences and my own make their way into the book. So Javier's character, I would say that is part of my own experience and the experiences of my kids, the anxiety related to weather. So Javier did not flood, and he feels a lot of guilt about feeling anxiety after Harvey, because he's like, well, I don't have it that bad. And I remember feeling that way, like I have nothing to be, I literally knew like 25 people whose homes flooded. It was one of the most intense events I've ever lived through. And I felt guilty to even be sad or anxious about it afterward, because, we didn't flood. But it was like 2 years of every time it would rain, I would start to feel anxiety, especially at night. Like, sleeping cozy in your bed with the rain falling, is like, used to be a feeling I enjoyed. And for really about 2 years after Harvey, I couldn't handle it. During Harvey, my husband and I were sleeping in shifts, getting up to see if the water because it was getting closer, to see if it was get to our house. We couldn't sleep through the night. And, so Javier's character, I think, is sort of in a sense, a mirror of some of the things that I went through there and dealing with that anxiety. And my students, for sure, they talk about it all the time, the anxieties they have related to climate change and the flooding that we experience in Houston. And then Eliza is, I confess, the type A part of me, the part of me that just thinks that everything can be solved if we just make it a to-do list. And I don't want to think about how I feel, so I'm just going to act and push down feelings. That element, I see that in my students too. I teach at Beller High School in Houston with a lot of very intense and committed kids. And sometimes I worry that they're taking on so much and they're not sitting with feelings, So that's a long answer, but.
Well, what I loved about the book is you do such a good job of capturing that sense of being trapped, all in that house together for Eliza, and living on top of each other, and how displaced you feel. And it reminded me a lot of COVID too.
Yes.
And so you were saying before that this was the event that you thought was going to be the huge, crazy event.
Yeah, I know. When I think about what teenagers have been through, everywhere, of course, but Houston specifically, my school, we were out of school for 5 weeks, and I felt terrible because we were coming back and I was going to do promotion for my novel Moxie. So I wasn't there when they came back and I felt terrible about it, and my school was so kind to still let me go. But it was a really, really rocky start to the year. And, you know, I thought, oh, it would never get wilder than this. And then we all know what happened. But yes, you know, just a really, really, really wild time. And, you know, schools that were not, you couldn't go to school. I mean, there were kids that just, their schools were destroyed. The elementary school near me that I had taken my son to play at the park there was gone. I mean, it was gone. And I just couldn't believe it. I like, how is Coulter gone? Like, it was always there. And, you know, those kids were displaced for 2 years. And it was very hard for that community. And that happened all over the city. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a bit about how you came to I know how you came to the characters, but in a craft kind of way. How hard were Javier and Eliza to come up with? Or were they, and do you do character studies? And
so I'm going to promote someone who I think you know.
Yeah.
I don't know if we talked about this. So I was struggling with just getting started on this one. I just had like a block, which I normally don't struggle with writer's block, but I had a block with this, and I knew the characters essentially, and I knew what I wanted to do, but so there is a YA writer, Jessica Brody, who is a lovely person, and we've done panels together and such. And if there are any writers in the room, this is like, she's not paying me to do this. She has something called Writing Academy, I think, or Writers Academy or Writing Academy. I can't remember what it's called, but Jessica Brody, if you just Google Jessica Brody. And she has these courses you can buy, right? And this is my 7th novel. Like, I'm thinking, do I really need this? But I was so stuck that I ended up taking her course of how to fast draft a novel, which I had never done. I had never written, I wrote this book, I wrote the first draft quite quickly over a summer, which normally it takes me about a year to write a first draft. But she had this whole technique. She gives you like a little workbook, and she gives you all of these like, you know, tools and word count. It's just, and she gives you like character studies and all of these little tasks to do. And then she asks you to set a goal, a number of words a day. And then she says you have to make a ritual. You have to find an accountability partner, all this stuff. And so this is, I don't know if you will find this funny. I ended up doing this funny thing. I wrote every day. I had an accountability partner, my friend Kate, who lives in Houston. I would text her every day. I made my count. But at the beginning of every writing session, I'd sit down at the computer and I'd go, I snapped my fingers 3 times, and then I just wrote. And I really fast drafted, which I've never done. I normally go slow, think about it. And I just dumped this draft out. And surely we went through revisions and edits with my editor. But it was an interesting process, and it helped me. It helped me, all of her little strategies and techniques. So there's a little commercial for Jessica Brody. But that was the process. That's how I ended up doing it, was I fast drafted it. And there it was. I mean, there was the first draft. It was kind of a wild experience.
And she wrote, what's it called? The Cat.
Yeah, the Cat Saves a Young Adult Novel.
What is it called? Something.
Save the Cat.
Save the Cat.
Save the Cat.
Writes a novel.
Right. Save the Cat is this like famous book about how you write a screenplay in 3 acts, and there's all these rules that you follow and such. But she adapted it for how to write a young adult novel, like and a novel too, I think, like through. So she's just like this guru of writing, and
the book is terrific.
Yeah, and she's a really great person. So anyway, but I was like, this 3, and it worked. It did work. Like, so that's how I did it, and that's kind of Javier and Eliza just kind of came out, and they started showing up on the page. And the more I did it, the more I was getting to know them. And then when I turned that draft into my editor, then we began more of the heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. But you know, I often tell my students, like, the only rule about a first draft is that it has to be done. And so, you know, I had to follow that rule for myself this time.
And I know we talked before about your other books that we kind of generally outline, but we're ready for lots of surprises along the way.
Yeah.
This one seemed to be more detail plotted out.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of what, with her method, like I was able to kind of figure out these beats. I did end up in the revisions adding a bit more. The character, Javier's older brother has a girlfriend, Rosario, who's pregnant, and with his soon-to-be niece or nephew, and she was more of a minor character in the first draft, and through the revisions, my editor said, I really let's make her a little more important.
Yeah, I love her.
And I love her too. And so she becomes much more important in this draft. And I really enjoyed, that happening. So, yeah.
Did it change the way you write after that experience?
The fast drafting experience?
Did it
I
influence
think it
anything?
made me more confident that I could do it again if I needed to. I've fallen back into my old ways, I will say, which is writing more slowly. But I think that that's the thing that as a writer, every book teaches us something new. And whether that's about our writing styles or our relationship with the publishing industry or anything. I mean, there's a lot of things each book teaches. And so this book taught me I can do it. I can break through a writer's block, basically. Yeah.
Did you, in any of your books, like what is the most important element for you? Is it character?
Characters, for sure. I mean, I feel that I am a character-driven writer, and the characters become like real people in my mind. I mean, I think about Kurt and Alice from my very first novel. Like, I know where they went to college. I know if they still stayed together. They do. In my mind, they do. I mean, you can come up with whatever you want, but the characters belong to the reader. But I come up with whole worlds in my mind, and to the point that sometimes my editors have been like, hey, stuff has to happen. Like, it can't just be the characters. Like, I think I could write about them brushing their teeth, and that's interesting to me, but obviously. So I am a much more, there's these writers that talk about getting plot bunnies and they've got a million plots in their head. That's not me. I don't. I have a million characters in my head, but the plots are that's the harder part for me. Yeah.
I wanted to ask if you, now after that summer where you wrote every single day, are you still writing every single day? Like, what's your routine? And
so I'm not still writing every single day, no. Well, I mean, I do have a novel coming out for adults.
Yes, I was going to ask.
Yeah, so that was my latest big writing project. So after 7 books for young people, which has been such an honor to have that experience, I have my first book for adults coming out in July, so almost a year from now. It's coming out from Dutton, Penguin Random House, and it's called The Faculty Lounge, and it is set at a big public high school in Houston. And when I say this, my colleagues are like, is it going to be some kind of tell-all? It is a work of fiction. But it follows a sweeping cast of characters of adults that work in the school over the course of one unforgettable school year. And so that writing process was very different. That was much more at a slow pace. And I kind of allowed myself to write that as I wanted to. It was the first experience I'd had of writing not under a contract. So from The Truth About Alice to Down Came the Rain, I had a contract to fulfill. It was like there was a deadline and someone was going to pay me money and they wouldn't pay me if I didn't turn the book in. And once this was in the hopper and it was in copy edits and such, I mean, I've been working on The Faculty Lounge sort of here and there, but once this was in the hopper, I was like, I don't have a contract. Like, I'm just going to write this Faculty Lounge thing. I didn't even call it the Faculty Lounge. I was just like writing stuff. And I confess I really loved it. It was a really lovely experience to just write purely for myself again, and just kind of see where that went. And
I saw you during that time and you loved it. You said, I don't know
if it's going to sell. It actually started as a bunch of short stories. And then my agent sold it, but it was when I sold it to my editor at Dutton. She said, the thing is that we want to make this a novel, so we have to knit these stories together, and that's sort of what happened there. But which I've loved doing. It's been a really good experience. But yeah.
Let's see. Does anybody have any questions for Jennifer? We have some time before.
Yeah, sure. I know. Busy out there. I love your outfit, by the way.
I know.
That's really cool.
It kind of matches your book.
Yes, it does. It's very perfect.
That was not intentional.
Not intentional.
I was curious, this isn't about Down Came the Rain, it's about Moxie.
Yeah.
Like, how did that become a TV movie?
The movie with Amy Poehler?
How did she approach you?
Well, yes, that is truly one of the most surreal experiences of my life. so I have an agent, a book agent, and Mart is also with her. And so there are these people in the world that are called book to film agents, and they have the greatest job in the world, which is they just read books all day, and then they try to sell them to people who make them into movies. Like, who would not want this job, right? So my agent works with a book to film agent named Dana Spector. That's who sold it. And it was shortly after the 2016 election. Moxie was not even out yet, but the manuscript, the book had been sold and the book existed, and we were going through revisions and such. And the 2016 election happened, and so there was, I think, a hunger for stories about women and about feminism. And my agent said, you know, I'm going to send this out. We're going to see if we get any nibbles. And there, you know, every author will talk about, I mean, there have been nibbles, there's been interest. There was interest with The Truth About Alice. You know, I got into some kind of deal, it never went anywhere. So I was like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. And not thinking it would go anywhere at all. And one day I was sitting in the faculty lounge of my high school, and my agent called. I was grading papers, and she said, I need to tell you that Amy Poehler is interested in Moxie, and we need to set up a phone call. And I was like, what? And I literally wrote Amy Poehler on the piece of paper, like I was gonna forget, you know, like I was like taking notes, like Amy Poehler, okay, you know. And I'm a huge fan, I mean, I have been a fan of Amy Poehler since, you know, I mean, Upright Citizens. I mean, she's just like amazing. And so that's how it happened. It was that, and there were multiple offers actually. It was the weirdest, and it was incredible. I'm not gonna lie, it was an incredible experience. It was very surreal. And we had a phone call with all the agents on the call and Amy Poehler. And we talked for like 45 minutes, and I'm glad it was pre-Zoom days because I was like breaking out in hives. I was so anxious. And yeah, and then she said, we want to buy your book. And I was like, okay, you know. And then she's like, well, you just think about it, you talk to your agents. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm gonna say no, okay, I'm gonna think about it.
We're going a different direction.
Right, exactly. And that's how it happened. And then it was like a dream. It was just she, you know, then they wrote the screenplay. You know, you give up your rights for, you know, so she could adapt it any way that she wanted. I knew that, but I trusted her to adapt it well. And I think she did a great job. You know, they sent me the screenplay, they asked for my feedback, although ultimately they could do whatever they wanted. And then I got to visit the set, and that was really cool too. And so yeah, that's how it happened. It was really weird, but it was a dream come true, obviously. Yeah, dream come true. You have a question? Hi.
I do. I wanted to hear more about the title. I mean, obviously, from the Itsy Bitsy Spider, there's almost like a childlike musicality.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, it feels kind of like the perfect title, right? Your characters, they're young, there's a childlike quality to it. Obviously, there's this sort of terror they're facing. So I wanted to ask how the title came to you, if there were any other titles kind of rattling around in your brain, and what it felt like when you finally landed on this one.
You know, titles are one of my, like, obstacles. I do not like coming up with titles. There's these things on the internet I sound like an old person, like on the internet, okay, you can go on there, and there are these title generators you can use. I have done that. My third book, Afterward, which I still don't like that title, I must have gone through, it's about a young boy out in the aftermath of a kidnapping. And we were trying everything, and finally, I think my editor was just like, Afterward. I'm like, okay, fine. It's my least favorite title ever, although I'm proud of the book, but. And so I really struggle with titles. And for some reason, this one, it just hit me. I'm like, Down Came the Rain, like, and there is that double element of it being sort of, you know, a nod to sort of this childlike innocence and this, you know, little nursery rhyme that we all sing and we don't think anything of it. And then the reality of what the words really mean. And so it just came to me. And I thought, okay, this is a gift. Like, you know, I have writer's block for the book, but the title, I did not have writer's block. And there's actually, it's funny because when I searched to see like how the book is doing and stuff, Brooke Shields wrote a book called Down Came the Rain. I don't know if anyone knows it about her postpartum depression. And I'm a big Brooke Shields fan, so I'm like, okay, well, I share something in common with Brooke Shields. We both wrote books called Down Came the Rain. So, although I think it must have been in my file cabinet of my memory because the book has been out for a long time, but yeah, it just came, and I thought, that's it. And there was never any debate. My editor loved it, and that's how it happened. So thanks for asking.
And titles are so important. That's what's
Yeah,
hard. It's just
yeah.
when you can't land on
Yeah.
one for a while.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, you're an English teacher and you work
Yeah.
with for a teenager.
Yes.
I'm curious what that dynamic is like having students
Yeah.
who may be doing your work if they do engage with it. Like,
Yeah.
how does that play out? How does it
Well, it's funny. So I teach under my married name. So I do keep books. I have a classroom collection, and I do have my books there. And I have a little sign like "Books your English teacher wrote," and they're aware. Moxie was, Moxie especially, people became aware of it because of the Netflix movie, and so kids that I don't teach will be like, see me in the hall and like, "Miss, are you the one who wrote that book that became a movie?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that was me." So there's some curiosity. I'm also verified on Instagram, which is apparently a huge deal to them. Like, you're Instagram verified, you're a blue check on Instagram, which I don't even know. My publisher did it. I'm like, I guess I am. I don't know. I'm almost 47 years old. Okay, fine. But they're like kind of captivated by that element of it, the movie element of it, and that sort of thing, which is fun. I mean, that's just fun, And so. I just think to them, though, mostly I'm just their high school English teacher, which is what I want to be for them. I will occasionally talk about stuff. Like today, I missed school so I could join you all this evening. So I will let them know, like, I'm taking a personal day. It's some book stuff I have to do. And, they're all really sweet, and they congratulate me. And this, the Three Penny Press, the Bel Air High School newspaper, wrote a whole story. It was like so sweet. One of the reporters came and interviewed me and talked about Down Came the Rain. And the funniest thing that ever happened to me, though, as a teacher, regarding my books, I tweeted this. I'm not on Twitter very often, but I tweeted this, and it got so. I'm like, oh, I kind of went viral with this tweet, So this young woman, Lydia, was in my class. This was 2 years ago, and it was the beginning of the school year, and she was just kind of looking over my classroom library, and she saw a copy of Moxie, and I guess she just missed the books your teacher wrote, or she didn't, and she saw the book Moxie, and she said, oh, I didn't know Moxie was a book, because she had seen the film. And she goes, oh, I didn't know Moxie was a book. And I said, yeah, I wrote it. And she was like, what? Like, she could not conceive. And I was like, you didn't know? She goes, no. It was just so
That's
funny
awesome.
to me. Like, she just couldn't. She's like, wait a minute, what? Wait a minute, what? And then she said, what are you doing here? Why are you still teaching here? And I'm like, I like working with kids. I like working with teenagers. And she was just so stunned. And then I brought her a signed copy, and she loved it. And I took a picture of us and shared it and stuff. So it comes up in really sweet, mostly just really sweet ways. Yeah.
I'm curious, you mentioned that you had a contract for the young adult books.
Yeah.
You got to kind of write the one for adults for yourself.
Yeah.
But I was just curious if there was like a big mental shift between writing for young adults
Mhm.
and for adults, and you prefer one to the other? Or?
Someone asked me that. I did a local launch for Down Came the Rain at Blue Willow Bookshop. If you're ever in Houston, please make a visit because it's such a great store. And somebody asked me that same question, and I was stumped for a minute. I'm like, because I really do think writing is writing for me personally. When I'm really at when I'm in the groove and I'm loving it, I'm in another world, and the characters are real people to me. As I said, they live in my mind. I think about them all the time. I find so much pleasure and joy, and challenges too, to be fair. But I love to write. Like, why would anyone do this if they didn't love it on some level? You'd be bonkers to put yourself through it if you weren't feeling, experiencing pleasure from it. So that is the same for sure, regardless of whether I've been writing for adults or kids. There is a shift with writing for adults in that all my young adult novels are first person present, which is, I think, appropriate when you're writing for young people in the moment. I have inner chapters, like Liars and Mariposa Island. There's a third person inner chapter thing going on. But the Faculty Lounge has been third person past tense, and that was a shift. And I confess, I've enjoyed it in that it allows me to be, the omniscient narrator. It gives you a little more wiggle room. Writing for teenagers is hard work because you have to be in that moment, that fresh voice. So in some ways it's a bit different, but in other ways it's the same. And I feel very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to do both. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question on that. With voice, did you ever have to think, I'm writing for young people, young adults, or did that come naturally? And has it influenced you being around teenagers?
You know, writing for young people has come very naturally to me. I think being around teenagers all the time probably has something to do with it. I never ever try to put slang or things like that in this, because kids don't really talk like that. I mean, they'll use slang, but kids just talk like people for the most part. I don't know. I think it has just always come naturally to me. I will say though, you know, when I started writing for young adults, because it took me years to get my first book sold. I wrote 2 manuscripts before The Truth About Alice. They were good enough to get me an agent. They never sold. This was back when vampire books were big. Remember Twilight, if any of you remember that? And I was writing books about just like some girl in her high school, and you know, nobody was buying those books at the time, which is if there's any writers in the room, never chase a trend, because first of all, I could have tried to write a vampire book. I didn't want to do that. And by the time I wrote it, vampires were over anyway, right? So, but it took me a bit of time to break out in YA. And so I started writing YA in my late 20s, early 30s. And I'm almost 47 now, like I said. And while I still think I can write for teenagers, I'd like to think I still can, I'm now much more removed from my own adolescence than I was when I was 28 or 29. And so I'm kind of thinking about different things, like what does it mean to be middle-aged? Like what does it mean to be in this part of my life? And so I think that maybe was part of also what drew me to start wanting to write for grown-ups too. But people have said, will you never write for teenagers again? And I would never say never. You know, I think anything's a possibility, except picture books. I cannot do that. I don't know. People who write picture books are amazing people. That's the one thing I'll know I'll never do, because I don't know how people do that, to be so clever and creative with little kids' books. But anything else, we'll see.
Do you have any last questions before we do some signings?
Yeah.
How do you decide how dark or how light to go in the story? I guess I'm asking a high school librarian.
Yeah.
Kids don't seem to be, any amount of trauma in a fantasy book seems to be okay, but with realistic fiction, they seem to be, I feel like, more fragile in these last couple of years. Like,
Yeah.
they've been through so much.
Yeah.
So they kind of will want me to say, you know, it's got an uplifting end, or, you know,
Right.
you're this,
Right.
or the 2 Kleenex one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's always the realistic fiction ones that I'm trying to kind of present.
Right.
People ask that question. They don't care about it.
It's almost like fantasy removes them a little bit, or it's like a safer way to explore those feelings, which kudos, that's another thing, I'll never write fantasy or sci-fi. Again, kudos to people that can do it, because I don't know how to do that either. Yeah, you know, that's a really interesting question. And you know what, during the pandemic, I was not reading anything sad or dark. I was pulling out my young adult books. I was reading, you know what I was reading, you guys? Jackie Suzanne's Valley of the Dolls. You know those trashy books from the 60s? Oh my gosh, I have all of her books. I was pulling those suckers out. I was just like, I want to escape. I don't want to do anything bleak. And so I can't believe I just said I did. I'm proud of it. I'm proud to be a Jacqueline Suzanne fan. If you don't know who she is, look her up, because she was an icon. But so yeah, I do think that kids are sensitive to that, but I think all of us are, you know, given what we've been through in these past few years. But I also think that there is a time and place to explore difficult things in fiction, and that validates different feelings too, like things, we go through hard things. So as an artist, I try not to ever, I write the book I want to write. And then I have to just trust that it'll find the audience when it's that time for that audience to find that book. You know, my book, Liars on Mariposa Island, is very sad, and it's not a happy book. And it didn't find a wide audience. It didn't sell well, I'll be honest. It's fine. But I loved writing it, and I would never have not written it. And I know from some people that read it that they did love it. So for that, it was worth it. I will say for Down Came the Rain, we did make a concerted effort, and this was not like I didn't feel like it was making a compromise in any way. My editor and I discussed wanting to make it as broad of an audience as possible. So it is 12 and up, and I very consciously, it's a clean read, there's no swearing in it. Because I know that some parents and kids are sensitive to that, and that's okay. And so because I think this topic is something that even middle schoolers are worrying about, this book I hope will be accessible for them. And even though I think it's honest about things like eco-anxiety, I do try to end it on as hopeful a note as possible, while also being honest and realistic with the readers. And the resource guide, I think, hopefully will help with that too. So.
Great, are we ready for?
Ready to sign some books?
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. It's
Great.
been such a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it.